Ambassador Kim Mina felt her hands shake as she stood before the massive alien council chamber. The walls stretched up so high she couldn't see the ceiling, covered in strange glowing symbols that hurt her eyes to look at. Around her, representatives from dozens of alien species watched in silence. Some had too many arms, others had skin like tree bark, and a few floated in transparent tanks filled with purple liquid. But none of them mattered right now. Only the creature in front of her did. The Zephyrian Empire's representative was twice her height, covered in black scales that seemed to absorb light. Its red eyes burned like hot coals, and when it spoke, rows of razor-sharp teeth gleamed in its mouth. The translator device around Mina's neck converted its hissing voice into cold, emotionless words. "Humans have exactly 72 hours, the alien said, leaning down until its face was inches from hers. "Every human colony beyond your home star system must be abandoned. Your people will return to Earth and never leave again. This is not a negotiation." Mina tried to keep her voice steady. "Our colonies are home to millions of people. They have families, businesses, entire lives built there. Surely we can reach some kind of agreement." The alien's laugh sounded like metal scraping against stone. "Your species discovered space travel only 200 years ago. You are children playing with tools you don't understand. The Empire has ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. We have destroyed civilizations that were building starships when your ancestors were still living in caves." "But we've never threatened you," Mina said. "Our colonies are peaceful. We trade with other species, we follow galactic laws." "You exist," the alien replied simply. "That is threat enough. Humans breed too quickly, spread too fast. In another 1,000 years, you might actually become dangerous. Better to cage you. Now while you're still weak." The chamber fell completely silent. Mina could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. She thought about her daughter back on New Geneva Colony, probably playing in the artificial forests they'd grown there. She thought about the farmers on Kepler 442b who had spent generations turning that world into a garden. All of it would be lost. Back on Earth, Defense Minister Park Jun watched the transmission from his underground command center. The message had taken 6 hours to reach Earth through the quantum communication network. By the time he saw Mina's pale face on the screen, the clock was already ticking. "Sir," his aide whispered, "our deep space sensors are picking up massive fleet movements. The Zephyrian Armada is already on the move." Park Jun pulled up the tactical display. Red dots filled the three-dimensional map like a swarm of angry insects. 50,000 warships, each one larger than Earth's biggest space station. The human fleet had maybe 300 ships total, and most of those were cargo vessels with a few weapons bolted on. "How long before they reach our outer colonies?" he asked. "At their current speed, 18 hours for the advanced scouts. The main fleet will arrive in 36 hours. Park Jun closed his eyes. They'd always known this day might come. Humanity had expanded too fast, grown too confident. Other alien species had warned them quietly that the Empire was watching, waiting, but nobody expected them to act so quickly or so decisively. He opened a secure channel to the Arctic Research Station. "Dr. Kim Soo, are you receiving this transmission?" The elderly scientist's face appeared on screen, lined with age and worry. "I've been monitoring the situation, Minister. I assume you're calling about Project Blackstar." "Is it possible? After all these years?" Dr. Kim Soo was quiet for a long moment. In the background, snow howled against the windows of her isolated laboratory. "The theoretical framework is sound. We've run the calculations 1,000 times, but we've never actually tested it. The power requirements alone could destroy half the solar system if something goes wrong. And if we do nothing, the Empire destroys all of it anyway. Far out in the frozen darkness of the Kuiper Belt, beyond Neptune's orbit where the sun was just another bright star, something that had been sleeping for 30 years began to wake up. The emergency meeting room, buried 3 kilometers beneath Geneva, felt like a tomb. 27 of Earth's most powerful leaders sat around the curved table, their faces lit by the glow of holographic displays showing the approaching alien fleet. The air recycling system hummed quietly, but everyone could feel the weight of billions of tons of rock and steel above their heads. Admiral Lee Hanna had barely slept in 36 hours. Her usually perfect uniform was wrinkled, and her hands trembled slightly as she activated the classified files. She'd hoped to never see these documents again, let alone present them to the world's leaders. "What you're about to see," she began, her voice hoarse, "has been classified at the highest levels for 3 decades. Only 12 people in human space knew it existed." President Chen Wei of the Asian Federation leaned forward. "Admiral, our colonies are being evacuated as we speak. Millions of people are fleeing in cargo ships never meant for mass transport. We need solutions, not more secrets." Li Hana touched the holographic interface, and a 3-dimensional blueprint appeared above the table. It showed a ship unlike anything any of them had ever seen. Where normal spacecraft were built with straight lines and practical angles, this vessel curved and twisted in ways that hurt to look at. Parts of it seemed to fade in and out of existence. "Project Blackstar," she said quietly. "Begun in 2195, officially terminated in 2198. The most advanced piece of technology humanity has ever created, and possibly the most dangerous." Director Kim Young of the Science Council stared at the rotating image. "That's impossible. The power requirements alone would need the entire output of our sun." "That's what we thought too," Li Hana replied, "until we discovered the ruins on Titan." The room fell silent. Everyone knew about Titan. 20 years ago, mining crews had found structures buried deep in the moon's methane ice. Structures that were clearly artificial, clearly ancient, and clearly not human. The discovery had been kept secret to prevent panic, but it had changed everything humanity understood about their place in the universe. The builders of those ruins understood physics in ways we're still trying to comprehend, Li Hana continued. "We reverse-engineered what we could, built what we thought was possible. But the project's lead scientist, Dr. Choi Hyun, warned us the technology was too dangerous to use." Foreign Minister Park Min spoke up from across the table. "Where is Dr. Choi now?" "We exiled her," Li Hana admitted, and several council members gasped. "She knew too much and she refused to continue the project. We gave her a research station near Pluto and told the world she died in a transport accident." On the main screen, red alerts flashed as another human colony went silent. New Kyoto, home to 8 million people, had stopped transmitting 20 minutes ago. The alien scouts were moving faster than anyone had predicted. General Osung slammed his fist on the table. "Enough history lessons. Can this Blackstar weapon stop the invasion or not?" Li Hana pulled up another file, this one showing power calculations that made everyone's head spin. According to the theoretical models, yes, one ship could potentially destroy their entire fleet. But Dr. Choi was right to be scared. The weapon system doesn't just bend the laws of physics, it breaks them completely. "What kind of power source are we talking about?" asked Dr. Lim Seo from the Energy Department. "It doesn't use a power source," Li Hana said, her voice barely a whisper. "It draws energy directly from the quantum vacuum, from the space between atoms. If the containment system fails, it could create a chain reaction that would spread across the entire galaxy." The room erupted in arguments. Some shouted that they had to try, others demanded to know why such a weapon had been built in the first place. But Minister Park Jun, who had been quiet until now, stood up and raised his hand for silence. "How long would it take to make contact with Dr. Choi?" he asked. "The communication delay to Pluto is about 4 hours each way," Li Hana replied. "But sir, she's been alone out there for 15 years. We don't even know if she's still alive." Park Jun looked around the table at the faces of Earth's leaders. Through the wall screens, they could see more red alerts appearing as colony after colony fell silent. Humanity was dying, and they were the ones who had to decide how far they were willing to go to save it. "Send the message," he said finally. "If Dr. Choi Hyun can hear us, tell her that humanity needs her one more time." Dr. Choi Hyun was tending to her small hydroponic garden when the communication system crackled to life for the first time in 3 years. She nearly dropped her watering can, startled by the sound of another human voice after so long in silence. Her research station orbited Pluto in the endless darkness, where the sun looked like just another bright star among thousands. The message was encrypted with codes she hadn't used in 15 years. As she listened to Defense Minister Park Jun's desperate plea, her weathered hands began to shake. She was 73 years old now, her hair completely white, her back bent from years of working alone in the station's cramped corridors. She had thought her war with humanity was over. "Dr. Choi," Park Jun's recorded voice said, "I know we wronged you. I know we cast you out when you tried to warn us. But millions are dying, and you're the only person who truly understands what we built." She walked to her small observation window and stared out at the frozen wasteland of Pluto's surface. Somewhere beneath all that ice and rock, the thing she had helped create was waiting. She had spent 30 years trying to forget it existed, trying to convince herself that humanity would never be desperate enough to wake it up. The Blackstar had been her life's greatest achievement, and her worst nightmare rolled into one. While other scientists had studied the alien ruins on Titan, she had been the one to truly understand them. The mathematics were beautiful and terrible, describing ways to fold space-time like origami, to reach into the quantum foam that existed between reality and pull out impossible amounts of energy. "Computer," she said to her station's AI, "establish a connection to the Pluto facility. Authorization Choi Hyun 77 Alpha." "Connection established, Dr. Choi. All systems are responding normally after 30 years in standby mode." 3 kilometers beneath Pluto's surface, massive machines that had been sleeping since 2198 began to stir. The facility had been carved from solid rock and ice, then reinforced with materials that didn't exist anywhere else in human space. Even the air down there was different, charged with exotic particles that made normal electronics malfunction. At Huti, the center of it all, sat the USS Blackstar. Captain Song-woo had volunteered for the mission, knowing he would probably die. He was 42 years old, born on Mars, and had spent his entire career flying deep space exploration vessels. When Admiral Lee Hanna had asked for volunteers for a classified mission that would change the nature of human warfare forever, he had stepped forward without hesitation. Now he stood in the shuttle that would take him down to the Pluto facility, reading the classified briefing for the third time. The Blackstar wasn't just a ship. It was something that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that human science barely understood. To pilot it, he would have to become part of it in ways that no human had ever attempted. "Captain," his co-pilot Kim Jae said nervously, "are you sure about this? The medical team said there's no guarantee you'll still be human afterward." Song-woo looked out the shuttle's window at Pluto's scarred surface rushing past below them. "Jae, have you seen the reports from the colonies? The aliens aren't just killing our people. They're broadcasting it across the galaxy as entertainment. They're making examples of us." The shuttle landed on a platform that looked like it had been cut from a single piece of black crystal. As they descended into the facility, Song-woo felt his skin tingle from the exotic energy fields that surrounded them. The air itself seemed to shimmer and bend, and he could swear he heard whispers in languages that had never been spoken by human tongues. Dr. Choi Hyun was waiting for them in the control room, looking older and more fragile than Song-woo had expected. But her eyes were sharp and determined, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades wrestling with forces beyond human comprehension. "Captain," she said, "before we begin, I need you to understand something. The Blackstar isn't just a weapon, it's a doorway. Once we open it, we can never close it again. Humanity will never be the same." Song-woo nodded. "Doctor, humanity is dying right now. Whatever we become afterward, it has to be better than extinction." Deep in the facility's heart, the USS Blackstar began its awakening sequence. Lights that had been dark for 30 years flickered to life, and the ship's quantum engines started their first rotation in decades. The vessel itself seemed to ripple and shift, as if it couldn't quite decide which dimension it wanted to exist in. The war for humanity's survival was about to begin, and their greatest weapon was something that barely existed in the same reality as everything else they knew. Commander Vexcalar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with the bored expression of someone who had conquered 17 star systems without losing a single battle. The massive Zephyrian dreadnought was larger than most human cities, its black hull bristling with weapons that could crack planets in half. Around him, his bridge crew worked at stations made from living crystal that pulsed with alien thought. "Patterns, sir," his sensor operator hissed. We're detecting unusual energy signatures from the outer planets of this system. Vexcalar barely glanced at the readings. His scaled fingers drummed against his command throne, made from the bones of the last species that had dared to resist the Empire. Probably their primitive power plants overloading from fear, he said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. These humans panic so easily. The truth was Vexcalar was enjoying this campaign more than he had expected. Most species submitted immediately once they saw the Empire's fleet. The few that fought back usually lasted only hours before their leaders started begging for mercy. But humans seemed determined to make this entertaining. They actually thought their tiny metal ships could stand against weapons that had been perfected over 10 millennia. "Commander," another officer reported, "the advanced scouts have destroyed 3 more human colonies. Total casualties now exceed 15 million. "Good," Vexcalar replied. "Make sure to broadcast the recordings across all human communication networks. I want them to see what happens to species that refuse to know their place." What the Zephyrian commander didn't know was that those energy readings his sensors had detected weren't from overloading power plants. Deep beneath Pluto's surface, something was awakening that would make him question everything he thought he knew about the universe. Captain Song Wu lay on a medical table that hummed with technology borrowed from alien ruins. Dozens of thin cables connected to ports that had been surgically implanted along his spine and skull. Dr. Choi Hyun monitored his vital signs on screens that showed patterns no human doctor would recognize. "Captain," she said softly, "once we begin this process, there's no going back. Your consciousness will be merged with the ship's quantum matrix. You'll still be you, but you'll also be something more." Song Wu tried to keep his breathing steady. As the preparation continued, he could feel the cables warming against his skin, and strange sensations were already starting to flow through his nervous system. "Doctor, will I still remember my family? My life before this?" "The theory says yes," Dr. Choi replied, but her voice carried uncertainty. "But Song Wu, what we're doing has never been attempted. The alien technology we reverse-engineered operates on principles that our science barely understands. You might remember everything, or you might become something entirely new." Through the facility's reinforced walls, they could feel vibrations as the Uss Blackstar continued its startup sequence. The ship existed in a specially constructed chamber that had cost more than Earth's entire military budget to build. Even now, 30 years after its creation, the vessel seemed to shift and blur around the edges, as if reality couldn't quite contain it. "Beginning consciousness transfer," Dr. Choi announced. Song Wu felt electricity surge through the cables, and suddenly his perception exploded, beyond anything human senses could process. He was still lying on the medical table, but he was also everywhere at once. He could feel the ship's hull as if it were his own skin, sense the quantum engines spinning up to impossible speeds, taste the exotic particles that flowed through the vessel's alien-designed systems. The USS Blackstar wasn't just a ship, it was a living thing, a fusion of human engineering and technology from civilizations that had died before Earth's sun was born. As Song Wu's consciousness merged with its quantum matrix, he began to understand what Dr. Choi had been so afraid of all these years. The ship could move through dimensions that normal physics said didn't exist. It could fold space-time around itself, slip between the cracks in reality, become invisible to sensors that relied on detecting things that actually existed in normal space. But more than that, it could reach into the quantum vacuum and pull out energy that came from the universe itself. "Song Wu," Dr. Choi's voice seemed to come from very far away now. "Can you hear me?" "I can hear everything," he replied, though his voice now came from the ship's communication system as much as from his own throat. "Doctor, I can see the alien fleet. They have no idea what's coming." The Blackstar began to move, phasing through solid rock as if it were made of mist. It rose from beneath Pluto's surface without disturbing a single grain of ice, then began its journey toward the inner system where the Zephyrian fleet waited. Commander Vexcalar was still laughing at human weakness when his sensors completely failed to detect the most dangerous weapon his species had ever encountered, passing right through his defensive perimeter. The hunt was about to begin. The attack began at exactly 600 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Admiral Lehana watched from the bridge of her flagship as 50,000 alien warships spread across human space like a plague of metal locusts. Each Zephyrian dreadnought was over 3 kilometers long, their hulls black as the void between stars, bristling with weapons that could turn entire moons to dust. "All ships, this is Admiral Lee," she broadcast to humanity's pathetic excuse for a fleet. "Remember, we're not trying to win this fight. We just need to buy time." Her words felt hollow, even to her own ears. 300 human vessels against 50,000 alien warships wasn't a battle. It was a massacre waiting to happen. But every minute they could delay the enemy was another minute for evacuations to continue, another minute for desperate families to flee to the inner colonies. The first wave of alien fighters swept through the human formation like sharks through a school of fish. Human pilots, some barely out of training, threw their ships against an enemy that had been perfecting warfare for 10,000 years. The communication channels filled with final messages from young men and women who knew they were about to die. "Mom, if you can hear this, I love you," came one transmission from Lieutenant Park Soo as his fighter exploded against a Zephyrian destroyer's shields. "Tell my kids I was thinking of them," whispered Captain Kim Dong just before his corvette was vaporized by enemy fire. Lehana clenched her fists as she watched the tactical display. Each disappearing dot represented dozens of her people, and they were vanishing faster than she could count. The alien shields were impenetrable, their weapons cutting through human armor like it was made of paper. On the main screen, Commander Vexcalar appeared in a transmission meant for all human colonies. His scaled face filled the display, red eyes burning with cruel satisfaction. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship was decorated with the bones and skulls of conquered species. "Humans," he said, his voice dripping with contempt, "witness the price of defying the Empire. Your primitive weapons cannot even scratch our shields. Your ships are toys compared to our dreadnoughts. This is what happens to species that forget their place in the natural order." The transmission switched to live footage from the colonies under attack. New Sol, humanity's proudest achievement, burned from orbit as alien bombardment turned its gleaming towers into funeral pyres. The agricultural worlds of the Kepler system, where humanity had spent generations turning barren planets into gardens, were being scoured clean of all life. "Your leaders promised you could stand against us," Vexcalar continued. "They lied. Submit now, and some of you may survive as slaves. Continue to resist, and we will exterminate every last human in the galaxy." Lehana switched off the transmission, her hands shaking with rage. Around her, the bridge crew worked frantically to coordinate what was left of the defense. They had started with 300 ships. Now they were down to less than 50. And those were mostly damaged cargo haulers, with weapons cobbled together from mining equipment. "Admiral," her tactical officer reported, "the enemy is beginning their main bombardment of the Mars colonies. Estimated time until total destruction is 6 hours. 6 hours. That was all humanity had left unless a miracle happened. But far from the battle, moving through dimensions that the Zephyrian sensors couldn't even detect, that miracle was already on its way. The Uss Blackstar drifted through space like a ghost story, existing halfway between reality and dream. Captain Song Woo, now more than human but not quite machine, felt every photon of starlight that passed through the ship's quantum phase hull. He could sense the Zephyrian fleet ahead, their massive vessels radiating confidence and contempt. "They have no idea what's coming," Song Woo whispered, his voice echoing through dimensions that had no names. The alien fleet was spread across a light hour of space, their formation perfect and unbreakable. Their shields had never been penetrated. Their hulls had never been breached. In 10,000 years of conquest, they had never met an enemy they couldn't crush within hours. The Blackstar moved between their sensor sweeps like a shadow between raindrops. Its exotic hull existed in normal space, just enough to interact with gravity and light, but phased into parallel dimensions whenever alien sensors tried to lock onto it. To the Zephyrians, the ship was invisible, impossible, and completely undetectable. Commander Vexcalar was already planning his victory celebration when the universe around him began to change in ways that would haunt him for the rest of his very short life. The real war was about to begin, and humanity's enemies had no idea they were already dead. The USS Blackstar simply appeared, as if the universe had suddenly remembered it existed. One moment, Commander Vexcalar was watching his fleet destroy the last human resistance, and the next moment, something impossible was floating in the exact center of his formation. "What is that?" he demanded, staring at the main screen. His sensor, operator's claws scraped against his console as he tried to make sense of the readings. "Sir, I'm detecting a human vessel, but the energy signatures are impossible. It's reading as if it exists in 17 different dimensions simultaneously." The ship on the screen hurt to look at directly. Its hull seemed to shift and ripple, sometimes solid metal, sometimes transparent as glass, sometimes not there at all. Parts of it appeared to exist in spaces that the bridge crew's three-dimensional minds couldn't process. Just looking at it made several officers feel sick. "How did it get past our sensors?" Vexcalar roared. "Sir, according to our instruments, it didn't. One moment it wasn't there, the next moment it had always been there. Our sensors are showing that it's been in that position for the last 6 hours, but we have continuous recordings proving the space was empty." Vexcalar felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries of conquest. Not fear, not yet, but uncertainty. "All ships, target that vessel. Maximum firepower." The response was immediate and overwhelming. 1,000 ships opened fire simultaneously, their energy weapons creating a light show that could be seen from neighboring star systems. Beams of concentrated plasma, particle accelerators, and exotic energy weapons that could crack moons, all focused on the strange human ship. Captain Song Wu, existing now as both man and machine, felt the incoming fire like warm rain on his consciousness. The Blackstar's hull absorbed every joule of energy, converting it through processes that turned matter into pure possibility. The alien weapons, designed to destroy anything in the known universe, simply made the human ship stronger. Their weapons taste like desperation, Song Wu said, his voice carrying across multiple dimensions. "Dr. Choi, are you monitoring this?" From her station on Pluto, Dr. Choi Hyun watched the impossible readings with growing amazement and terror. "Song Wu, the ship is drawing power directly from the quantum vacuum. You're not just absorbing their weapons, you're using them to fuel, something that shouldn't be possible." The Blackstar's response was elegant and terrifying. It didn't fire missiles or energy beams. Instead, it reached into the fabric of space-time itself and simply edited enemy ships out of existence. Where a massive Zephyrian dreadnought had been floating moments before, there was now nothing. Not debris, not atoms, not even empty space. Just a perfect sphere of absolute void. Vexcalar watched in horror as ship after ship simply ceased to exist. "Shields up! All power to defensive systems!" But their shields, which had never been breached in 10 millennia of warfare, were useless against weapons that didn't attack matter, but attacked the very concept of existence. Another dreadnought vanished, leaving behind only a hole in reality. That hurt to look at. "Sir," his communications officer reported, his voice shaking, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Imperial Palace. Emperor Zekthanor wants a direct report." The main screen shifted to show the throne room of the Zephyrian Empire. Emperor Zekthanor, ancient beyond measure and master of 1,000 worlds, sat on a throne made from crystallized dark matter. His forearms gestured impatiently, and his 6 eyes burned with the arrogance of someone who had never known defeat. "Vexcalar," the Emperor's voice boomed across space. "Explain to me why my sensors are detecting impossible energy readings from your location." Vexcalar's voice cracked as he tried to respond. "Your Majesty, the humans have a weapon that defies our understanding of physics. It's destroying our ships by removing them from existence itself." For the first time in 1,000 years, Emperor Zekthanor felt something cold crawl up his spine. He had conquered species that could manipulate time, civilizations that had mastered the power of black holes, races that could reshape matter with their thoughts, but none of them had ever wielded technology that could simply delete things from reality. "Show me," he commanded. The transmission switched to the fleet's tactical cameras, and the Emperor watched as another of his dreadnoughts was erased from existence. The void left behind wasn't darkness or emptiness. It was the complete absence of anything, a wound in space itself that would never heal. "Impossible," he whispered, and for the first time in his long reign, Zek-Thanor felt the cold touch of fear. The USS Blackstar continued its work, moving through the alien fleet like death itself. Each ship it touched simply stopped existing, leaving behind only perfect spherical holes in reality. The humans had found something in those ancient ruins on Titan that even the Empire's 10,000 years of conquest had never prepared them for. The war was no longer about human survival. It was about whether the universe itself could contain what humanity had awakened. The USS Blackstar moved through the alien fleet like a predator that had finally found its prey. What had started as humanity's desperate last stand had become something far more terrifying. The hunters had become the hunted, and the Zephyrian Empire was learning what it felt like to be on the receiving end of overwhelming force. Captain Song-Woo existed everywhere within the ship at once. His consciousness spread through quantum processes that operated on principles no human university had ever taught. He could feel every alien vessel in the fleet, sense their terror through the electromagnetic signatures of their panicking crews. Part of him still remembered being human, still felt compassion for the enemy soldiers who were just following orders. But another part of him, the part that was now machine, calculated their destruction with cold efficiency. "Let's show them what real weapons look like," he whispered into the void. The Blackstar's first new weapon was elegant in its simplicity. It reached into the quantum foam that existed between atoms and pulled out tiny pieces of compressed space-time. These singularity bombs weren't nuclear weapons or antimatter explosives. They were miniature black holes, each one containing the mass of a small moon compressed into a space smaller than a grain of sand. Commander Vex-Kalar watched in horror as one of his escort carriers simply imploded. The ship didn't explode outward like normal weapons would cause. Instead, it collapsed inward, its hull crumpling like paper as a controlled black hole ate it from the inside out. Within seconds, 3,000 tons of advanced starship had been compressed into a sphere no bigger than a marble. "All ships, scatter formation," Vex-Kalar screamed into his communicator. "Don't let it target multiple vessels at once." But the Blackstar's second weapon made formation irrelevant. Reality disruptors reached into the dimensions that normal matter couldn't access and simply pushed enemy ships into parallel space. To outside observers, it looked like the ships were fading away like ghosts, becoming transparent and then vanishing completely. "Where did they go?" Vex-Kalar demanded. His science officer, a being whose species had mastered space travel when Earth was still molten rock, stared at his instruments in complete bewilderment. "Sir, they're still there, but they're not there. They exist in a parallel dimension, but they can't get back. They're trapped in a space that runs parallel to ours, but never touches it." The third weapon was perhaps the most cruel. The Blackstar's temporal disruptors could accelerate time around a target, aging ships and crews thousands of years in the span of seconds. Vex-Kalar watched as the dreadnought Eternal Conquest, pride of the Seventh Fleet, suddenly began to rust and decay. Its hull corroded, its crew aged to dust. Its engines died as metal fatigue caught up with machinery that had suddenly experienced centuries of use in moments. "This is impossible," Vex-Kalar muttered, but his protests were lost in the screams of his dying fleet. The most terrifying part wasn't the weapons themselves, but how easily the human ship wielded them. The Blackstar moved through the battle like a craftsman at work, each target selected with careful precision, each weapon chosen for maximum psychological impact. It wasn't just destroying the fleet, it was making a statement. "All ships, retreat," Vex-Kalar finally ordered. "Full retreat, get us out of this system." But running from the Blackstar was like trying to outrun a nightmare. The ship existed partially outside normal space-time, which meant it could take shortcuts through dimensions that conventional vessels couldn't even detect. As the surviving Zephyrian ships fled toward the edge of the solar system, the Blackstar simply folded space around itself and appeared in front of them. Song-Woo felt a moment of sadness as he watched the alien ships trying desperately to escape. These weren't the masterminds who had ordered the destruction of human colonies. These were soldiers, engineers, maintenance crews who had never chosen to be part of a war. But they were still part of a machine that had killed millions of humans, and that machine needed to be stopped. "I'm sorry," he said to the fleeing ships, knowing they couldn't hear him, "but you picked the wrong species to hunt." The chase continued across 3 star systems. Every time the Zephyrians thought they had escaped, the Blackstar would appear again, picking off stragglers with weapons that redefined what warfare could be. Ships that tried to hide in asteroid fields found themselves aged to dust. Vessels that attempted to jump to hyperspace discovered that the Blackstar could follow them into dimensions that weren't supposed to exist. Within 6 hours, the largest fleet in Zephyrian history had been reduced to fewer than 100 ships. Commander Vexkala, trapped in his flagship with nowhere left to run, sent a desperate message back to his home world. "Your Majesty," he transmitted, "the humans have become something we don't understand. They're not just more advanced than... Thus, they're operating on principles that make our science look like children playing with sticks." Emperor Zek-Thanor, watching the destruction from his throne room, felt his 4 hands trembling for the first time in a millennium. The humans had gone from being the galaxy's weakest species to possibly its strongest in the span of a single day. The age of Zephyrian dominance was ending, and something far more terrible was taking its place. The emergency broadcast reached every corner of the galaxy within hours. It wasn't just the Zephyrian Empire sending out desperate calls for help anymore. Now it was every species, every civilization, every government that had ever heard whispers about the strange bipedal creatures from the 3rd planet of an unremarkable yellow star. On the crystalline world of Veltara, Chancellor Kixmorton watched the recordings with growing horror. His species had perfected genetic engineering to the point where they could reshape their own biology at will. But what they were seeing defied all understanding of what was possible. "How many ships did the humans destroy?" he asked his intelligence. "Officer, according to our deep space monitors, over 49,000 Zephyrian vessels were eliminated. The entire 7th Fleet gone in less than 18 hours. But Chancellor, that's not the most disturbing part." Kixmorton's bioengineered features shifted nervously. "What do you mean?" "They did it with a single ship. 1 vessel destroyed. The largest military force in galactic history." Similar conversations were happening across thousands of worlds. The gaseous beings of the Helix Nebula, who existed as pure energy, found themselves afraid of creatures made of solid matter. The machine consciousness of the Anderon Collective, which had computed every possible outcome of galactic warfare, discovered that their calculations had never included the possibility of weapons that could delete matter from existence. But nowhere was the fear more intense than on Zephyr Prime, the capital world of the Empire that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. Emperor Zek-Thanor sat on his throne of crystallized dark matter, surrounded by the greatest military minds his species had ever produced. The throne room, carved from a single massive gem, had hosted the surrender ceremonies of hundreds of conquered species. Now it felt more like a tomb. "Your Majesty," General Krethak reported, his voice shaking, "long-range sensors have detected an energy signature approaching our system. It matches the human weapon." The Emperor's 6 eyes focused on the tactical display floating before his throne. A single dot moved through space toward their homeworld, but the energy readings it generated were unlike anything in their databases. It wasn't just moving through normal space. It was taking shortcuts through dimensions that their science insisted didn't exist. "How long until it arrives?" the Emperor asked. "At its current rate of travel, approximately 4 hours. But, Your Majesty, its speed keeps changing. Sometimes it appears to be traveling faster than light. Other times it seems to be moving through folded space." 4 hours. 4 hours until the most powerful empire in galactic history would face judgment from the species they had dismissed as primitive children. The Uss Blackstar materialized in orbit around Zephyr Prime without warning, just as it had appeared in the middle of their fleet. Captain Song Wu, now existing as something between human consciousness and quantum energy, looked down at the world below him. It was beautiful in its own alien way, with cities that spiraled up from the surface like crystalline flowers and vast oceans that glowed with bioluminescent life. But it was also the heart of an empire that had murdered millions of humans without a second thought. "Dr. Choi," Song Wu's voice reached across space to the research station near Pluto. "Are you monitoring this?" "I'm here, Song Wu," Dr. Choi Hyun replied. "The entire galaxy is watching, every deep space monitoring station, every intelligence network. Every species that's ever looked up at the stars. What you do in the next few minutes will change the course of galactic history. Song-Woo felt the weight of that responsibility. With the Blackstar's weapons, he could reduce Zephyr Prime to cosmic dust in seconds. He could eliminate the Empire's leadership, their military infrastructure, their entire civilization, but that would make humanity no better than the monsters they had just defeated. Instead, he opened a communication channel that reached every receiver on the planet below. "People of the Zephyrian Empire," Song-Woo's voice echoed across their homeworld. "This is Captain Song-Woo of the Terran Federation. Your fleet came to our space with the intention of committing genocide. They murdered millions of innocent humans, including children who had never even seen your species." The transmission was being broadcast across the galaxy, picked up by monitoring stations on thousands of worlds. Every civilization that had ever feared Zephyrian expansion was listening. "But we are not you," Song-Woo continued. "Humanity does not seek conquest or domination. We want only to live in peace, to explore the stars, to learn from other species and share what we have discovered. But we will no longer tolerate aggression against our people." On Zephyr Prime, Emperor Zek-Thanor listened to words that would end his empire's 10,000-year reign of terror. "Your military forces are destroyed, your fleets are scattered, but your people live because we chose mercy over vengeance. Let this be the last time any species in this galaxy believes that humanity can be bullied, conquered, or eliminated. We are no longer the children you thought we were." The galaxy held its breath as the message ended. The age of human weakness was over, and something far more powerful had taken its place. Emperor Zek-Thanor had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years, but he had never felt as small as he did standing before the holographic projection of Captain Song-Woo. The human's image flickered slightly, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously, a reminder that humanity now wielded technology that made the Empire's greatest achievements look like stone tools. "Your Majesty," Song-Woo's voice carried across space with the weight of absolute authority, "your empire ends today, not through conquest or destruction, but through choice. You can surrender with dignity, or you can watch as every species you've oppressed rises up with humanity's backing." The Emperor's forearms trembled as he reached for the ceremonial surrender crystal that had been carved from his throne room's walls. In 10,000 years of conquest, no Zephyrian ruler had ever been forced to use it. The crystal dissolved in his hands, its destruction broadcast across every world in the Empire as the ancient symbol of unconditional surrender. "The Zephyrian Empire formally surrenders to the Terran Federation," he spoke into the recording devices. That would carry his words to every corner of the galaxy. "All occupied worlds are hereby granted immediate independence. Full reparations will be paid to all species harmed by our expansion. The age of Zephyrian rule is over." The surrender ceremony was broadcast live across thousands of worlds. Planets that had suffered under Zephyrian occupation for centuries, entire populations poured into the streets in celebration. Species that had been enslaved, exploited, or nearly driven to extinction by the Empire's expansion suddenly found themselves free. But the real change was happening in the halls of power throughout the galaxy. Within hours of the surrender, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session that would reshape interstellar politics forever. Ambassador Kim Mina, who had stood helpless before the Council just days earlier, now found herself seated at the high table as delegates from hundreds of species listened to her every word. The same aliens who had dismissed humanity as primitive now hung on her statements with desperate attention. "The Terran Federation accepts full membership in the Galactic Council," she announced, "along with territorial rights to all systems within 50 light-years of Earth. We also claim protectorship over any species that requests our assistance against aggression." The vote was unanimous. Even species that had never heard of humans before this week raised their appendages in support. Nobody wanted to risk becoming the next target of humanity's impossible weapons. Trade delegations began, arriving at Earth within days. The crystalline beings of Arcturus offered technology for manipulating matter at the molecular level. The energy creatures from the Vega system proposed partnerships in stellar engineering. Even former Zephyrian client states sent envoys bearing gifts and alliance proposals. Dr. Choi Hyun watched it all from her research station near Pluto, her weathered face reflecting decades of vindication and wonder. The galaxy that had once seen humanity as weak and primitive now looked to Earth for leadership and protection. Her terrible creation had not just saved humanity, it had elevated them to a position she had never dared imagine. Song Woo, she transmitted to the Blackstar as it approached Earth. How does it feel to be the most powerful being in the galaxy? Captain Song Woo's consciousness, now spread across quantum dimensions but still recognizably human, considered the question carefully. Lonely, he admitted, but necessary. For too long this galaxy has been ruled by whoever had the biggest guns or the cruelest intentions. Maybe it's time someone with actual principles held the power. The USS Blackstar entered Earth's solar system like a returning hero, but Song Woo knew his real work was just beginning. The ship that existed between dimensions would become humanity's silent guardian, watching over not just human space, but any species that chose cooperation over conquest. On worlds throughout the galaxy, children who had grown up fearing the darkness between stars now looked up at the night sky with wonder instead of terror. Somewhere out there, invisible and patient, the Blackstar waited. Humanity had learned to reach beyond the possible, and they would ensure that no species would ever again have to face extinction alone. The galaxy had a new protector, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the universe felt a little bit safer. Humanity's golden age hadn't just begun, it had already started changing everything it touched, one star system at a time. The age of human weakness was over. The age of human responsibility had begun.